This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by iZotope, Native Instruments, Atom Audio, and SAE Institute Nashville. You're hearing my voice right now mixed through iZotope, RX, Ozone, and Neutron on Atom Audio monitors and headphones. Please check out our awesome sponsors using the links in the show notes below, and like and subscribe to our YouTube channel and leave us a comment. It's a great way for you to help support this show. Now get ready to rock. How do we get a drum sound like the Weezer Blue album?
You get Pat Wilson and you put him in Electric Lady Studio A. That's how you get that drum sound. I think that it was a very simple setup. A lot of people get into this thing where they build a house around the kick drum and they do all these things. I used to do that very early on in my career, and I discovered that the benefits far did not outweigh the whatchamacallit, the effort it takes to do something like that. Yeah, it's just like it takes forever. You want to move a mic, you got to take the whole tent apart and move it and then put it back together again. So really simple, like the kick drum would be like a 421 on the inside, a FET 47 on the out. The snare would be a 57 on top, a 441 on the bottom. The overheads were probably a pair of 87s. Hi-hat, who cares? I have no idea what I did in the hi-hat.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. At iZotope, mixing just got even smarter. Introducing the new iZotope Catalyst series, Plasma, Aurora, and Cascadia, designed to transform your sound with intelligent processing for dynamically precise saturation, reverb, and delay. Plus, Neutron now features 3 new modules and an upgraded AI-powered mix assistant to help you get killer mixes with ease. Use the secret code ROCK10 to get 10% off the Catalyst series, Neutron, RX, or any of iZotope's incredible plugins at iZotope.com. Howdy, Rockstars. It's your host, Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Chris Shaw, a 4-time Grammy-winning producer, engineer, mixer, and musician. Starting out at Green Street Recording, he quickly rose from a New York University intern to staff engineer, working with hip-hop legends like Public Enemy, A Tribe Called Quest, Run DMC, and LL Cool J. In fact, in 1991, he played bass with LL Cool J on MTV Unplugged. Going independent, he's since worked with artists like Weezer, Wilco, Bob Dylan, Jeff Buckley, Sheryl Crow, Death Cab for Cutie, and many, many more. His work appears on 6 of Rolling Stone's 500 greatest albums of all time. Originally from New York, Chris relocated to Austin, Texas in 2014, and Chris has also been a guest on the podcast previously for RSR511 and 365. So please welcome back Chris Shaw to Recording Studio Rockstars. Chris, my man, are you ready to rock, dude?
It's been
good
a while.
To have you here.
Yeah. It's good to be back for the 3rd time.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. I know you were kind of kicking some of the cold that was going around or whatever. So
yeah, I got a bit of I got off the flu. I'm still getting over a flu, so if I cough, I apologize. But I'll try.
All right, yeah. Well, thank you for taking the time to do this with us, man. It's great to see you. So on previous episodes, we've talked about your backstory. We've gone into things like, your deep involvement with SoundFlow, which is really cool. We've also just sort of done a bit of a walkthrough of what your mixing desk looks like, because you, like certain people that I admire in mixing, have really figured out how to maximize the space and have controllers and buttons and everything to just make your flow really efficient. But maybe I'll begin by just asking what's new for you right now in the past couple of years in your mixing setup. Anything?
Actually, let's see. I've got a pair of S1s. I've got an old Android tablet running Avid Control. I've got a really old Euphonics MC Transport, which I don't use that often, but it looks good on the desk. I've got about 2 Stream Decks. I've got a Stream Deck Plus, which is the Stream Deck with the 4 knobs on it that you can use to control stuff. I've got a MIDI Fighter Twister, which is a 16-button/knob MIDI controller that I use for all kinds of stuff. It's actually my monitor controller while I'm mixing. And I think that's really about it as far as controllers are concerned.
That's cool.
I actually used to have another pair of iPads out, but I realized I wasn't using them as much, and they were more eye candy than anything else. So, and they were also angled weird, so I'm sure I was getting really weird reflections off of it or something like that. So I got rid of them.
Well, maybe I can remember to edit this into the video when we do it. But if you feel like sending me just an iPhone photo afterwards, I'll see if I can pop that up on the screen for you, Rockstars. So let me ask you this question about that stuff with the dual S1s. I was doing that for a minute, and I found that having another U-Control app open on an iPad or on a Kindle Fire or whatever was kind of a cool way to have the touch screen control over opening and closing track folders.
Right.
What are some basic descriptions of your workflow when it comes to that stuff?
To the controllers, like the S1 in particular, I actually don't use it as often as I don't dive too deep, and it's primarily for fader, pan, and mute control. Plus, on the bottom of each S1, there's these soft keys that now you can assign different commands to. So there's 2 of them, so each one has 8, so I have 16 extra buttons to do stuff with. But most of the stuff I do, I use SoundFlow, and I have either a keyboard shortcut for it or a Stream Deck button for it, because I find that it's just a little bit faster to do things that way, because I can really fine-tune how I want things to work, But my most used command actually isn't a SoundFlow command, is when I'm mixing a track and I've got the edit window in front of me. I always like to have whatever fader I'm working on banked all the way to the left, because it's just really convenient to have my hand on the keyboard and ride a vocal with my left hand. So if you hold Shift Control and you click on that track label, it automatically scrolls it up to the top of the edit window, and that causes all the faders in the S1 to bank to that side. So I use that a lot to shuffle around and move around the session. And also, a lot of people use folders to organize their tracks. To put all their drums in a drum folder, the guitars in a bass folder. I really don't do that, because before we had folders, I used to use memory locations to do something very similar, because with memory locations, you can set it to show and hide tracks, So I had a drum, I have 10 of those set up, memory locations, and they're always the same thing, 89 is drums, 93 is vocals, 94 is background vocals, 91 is electric guitars and stuff like that. And I can show and hide things way faster because I have muscle memory, and I just use the number pad on the keyboards really quickly. So I can zip around a session like that. But I do use folder tracks for well, I've got these oohs and ahs for the chorus. I'll just throw them all into a folder, and that way I can just throw a compressor or whatever on it, and EQ and stuff like that. But I don't use too much of the Yukon commands as such, because I find that I can get a much more granular experience by just writing custom commands in SoundFlow to set things up the way I like to.
Yeah, that makes sense. And when I did a mixing event with Colin Dupuis, he was sort of showing me some of those same ideas of using the show and hide feature. It's one of those features in Pro Tools that I sort of always saw it was there, but I didn't really pay any attention to it, because I always thought of that entire window in Pro Tools as just markers on the timeline. Right. Until, you start discovering, these can be zoom settings, these can be show and hides, all kinds of stuff.
They can be window arrangements, all that stuff, yeah. Which I don't actually use the window arrangements at all. It's one of those things I just never got into, because I just never even touched. I'm sure I'm missing out a lot, And I know a lot of guys, though, who do use the folders to, shuffle around. I know Sheps is a real big fan of using folders because you can like just tap on it on your tablet and it automatically just spills out the folder across your faders and stuff like that.
I could never figure out how to close the folder again though. When
you just double tap it. You just double tap the select key on the same exact,
Oh man!
So you double click to open it, double click to close it, and there you go. And I just
one of those
find
I could have had a V8 moment.
Yeah, exactly. But it's like it takes a while to get into using that stuff. Like when you're first learning how to do it, it just seems like it slows you down, and it's sort of like an impediment to like getting around a session. But if you stick with it long enough, eventually it just becomes second nature. The same thing happens like when I do the show high tracks using the memory locations. It's literally muscle memory. I can literally, I don't even have to look at the keyboard. I know exactly how to call up my vocal and call up my guitars and stuff like that. So it's great.
What do you do in your process? I mean, you must iterate still, right? Like, do you sort of incrementally add new, like teach yourself how to do new, deeper commands on things?
Yeah.
Do you have a process that works for you for adding that stuff where you don't feel like you're delaying everything too much?
I just like, I always keep either a notepad on my computer or a physical notepad, which just when I find I'm kind of doing the same thing over and over again, and I just like, I know I can do that faster somehow. I haven't quite figured out, I don't know how, but like I just make a note. How can I get around this? And it's either a SoundFlow thing or it's just learning a new keyboard shortcut. It's something, sometimes it's just as simple as that. And occasionally I still sit down and I read the manual. Every time a new version of Pro Tools comes out, there's always a what's new. And I just read through it. And I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds like something interesting. I could probably incorporate it. And I try it and I make a point of trying to use it as many times as I can during a session. And if it sticks, it sticks. If it doesn't, just move on. You don't have to know everything. You just need to know the things that make you work faster,
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, Pro Tools specifically is, is designed for so many different use cases.
Right. Exactly. I know a lot of guys in post through the SoundFlow forum, and when we talk about our workflows, they're just so different. They're so completely different, Do
you have to manage 500 tracks at a time ever like those guys do?
I've had mixes where that topped out at like 270, not including my template on its own is 80 tracks, and then you bring in another, 150 or 200 from an artist, and then it gets pretty dense pretty fast. So figuring out ways to navigate around the session as quickly as possible is super, super, super important.
How steady or consistent is your tempo? Is it like hewn in granite rock and doesn't change? What do you mean by tempo? Oh, excuse me, not your tempo, your template. That's what I meant to say. Yeah, sorry.
I try to change. A lot of it is hewn. Like I have some, like my parallel drum bus hasn't changed in a dog's age. But every once in a while, and I'll check out a new plugin and I'll put it in my template if I think it's doing something interesting. Like on my drum bus, I have a whole bunch of different compressors and limiters and saturators, but they're not all on. They're just in and deactivated, and so that way I can just pop them on and off as I like. So occasionally I'll be working on a drum thing and I'll be like, I wonder if I can do something more exciting, and I'll pop open. Like I use the Kush UBK1. There's like this really crazy Abbey Road setting that's just nothing but distortion, but I have it the wet dry mix pretty low, and I'll just pop that in. I mean, like I just think it's good to have the options there ready to try rather than sitting there going, well, my drums aren't that good sounding. What can I use? And all of a sudden start scrolling through hundreds and hundreds of plugins. I mean, I got Pro Tools now it tells you how many plugins you've got as it's loading. So I'm up to something like 1,200 at this point. It's ridiculous,
Have you ever gone through that process of saying I'm removing everything out of my plugin folder over to this other folder and just using the ones I normally use, and then I'll go pull them in?
I wish I could. But I get sessions from other engineers and other artists, and they've got their plugins in there, and it's like, oh yeah, I've got that. I got to put it back in the folder, or it's just easier for me to keep them in there. But it does make updating a bit of a problem. It's something you have to kind of keep on top of. So what I always do is like every 6 months or so, I'll open up my plugin folder and sort it in date order, or or modification date, whatever, so I can just see what plugins are the oldest, and then I can just go and I just do a search to see if there's any updates on those. And if there are, I'll just sit there for, half an hour or whatever and do all the updating, It's just regular maintenance. So like you have to, if you had a tape machine, you'd have to demag it and, clean the heads and the capstan. In today's world, it's just every once in a while you got to do maintenance on your plugin folder. You got to go in there and just make sure everything's up to date, because 9 times out of 10 when Pro Tools crashes, it's because of an old plugin. Even if you're not using an old plugin, it can cause havoc down the line. And I'm a beta tester for Pro Tools as well. So like I see that stuff in the beta tester forums all the time. People are like, oh, it's crashing. It's like, oh yeah, it's this because they haven't updated their code base and yada, 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 yada. So it's nuts.
Things move quickly in the digital world for sure.
Yeah.
And then what about when you think about like being prepared for, something goes wrong with the computer, or you have to reinstall or something like that? Are there good tips for how to manage a giant plugin library for reinstalling in the future?
I've never had to do a total reinstall for anything. I think the best thing to be doing is just always be backing up your system like once a week, maybe even a little less, because sometimes some problems don't pop up until like a week or two after you've installed something, and all of a sudden you decide to try it, and it's like, oh shit, what's going wrong? So if you have like a backup from like 2 weeks ago or whatever, you can always roll back to that. And I just do a new system install if I have to, or actually I could just swap out the hard drive in a pinch, because I make a clone. And these days with the new Apple file formats and stuff like that, and the way they divvy up a drive, cloning a drive is becoming increasingly more and more difficult, but it can be done. It's just
like carbon copy cloner.
Yeah, but like, like the Mac drive now, there's like a hidden data sector that holds all your apps and stuff like that, and another one just for data, and it gets really, well, as far as your startup drive is concerned, and things get really, really squirrely really, really fast, and you have to constantly keep up to date. As like, well, how I'm always online just saying like, okay, what's the best way to completely clone, a new Mac drive? Otherwise, because you can't do it the old way anymore.
What about Time Machine? Do you find that
I don't use Time Machine at all. No.
Yeah.
I have But I've heard great things about it. I know people who do Time Machine. So I guess you could, if you ran Time Machine and your plugin folder gets squirrely, you can always go back however far back you want to and replace it. But plugins are weird because you have like the plugins themselves, and then the settings and the presets are stored
application support and all that stuff.
Yeah, or it's in the user documents folder. It's I try not to think about it,
Yeah. One of the things I try to remember to do too is just open the plugins folder, select all, copy, and paste it into a doc somewhere, so I just remember what plugins I had.
Yeah,
that's a lot of stuff to keep track of.
Yeah, it is. It's nuts. Like I had. Yeah, when I go sit down for my bi-yearly, plugin updating session, it's just like, oh God, where are all these passwords, and where are all, a good password manager is another one,
I find that really helpful. And of course, iLok is helpful. In that instance, it's great when plugins use iLok because
I love iLok. I know people hate iLok, especially if you use the cloud, but I've only once, like 15 years ago, I had a problem with iLok, but that was about it. It's great because you can, like, if you're traveling, you could just take all the licenses off your iLok, fly to whatever studio with your iLok in your pocket, get to the studio, then throw all the licenses back on, just in case you lose the iLok in transit, and then and then just go, Plus, most companies now are giving 2 licenses for almost everything now. So if you do lose it, you still have that second license, I have no problems with iLok. There's a lot of hate for it, but I don't understand why.
Yeah.
It always just works.
Okay. So let's see. That's cool talking about the mixing workflow and the computer stuff. I feel like I had in my mind where we were about to go with that, but what else is exciting for you right now? Anything new studio wise or new stuff that's coming along?
I got projects coming up that I can't talk about that I'm excited about. I got a record coming up in May that I'm going to be doing on 2-inch, which is going to be amazing. It's like a
awesome.
The artist called me up and says, I want to do it on 2-inch. I'm tired of looking at computer screens while tracking. I'm like, fine, as long as you're down with like the process that's involved. He's like, I've always done everything on 2-inch, so yeah, no problem. I'm like, great, I'm looking forward to it. As long as the machine works, you'd be surprised how many people have the machine and haven't touched it in like 5 years, and you power it up and caps are blowing and the bias is all wrong and everything like that.
Right.
So,
right. Is this? Should I ask you where you're going for that, or is this more?
It's going to be locally. It's going to be here outside of Austin in Cedar Creek. But
cool.
It's hopefully we're going to visit the studio next Monday to check it out. But it looks really great.
So you don't know what kind of tape you're going to use yet, or anything?
Not
like that?
yet. What's available these days?
I don't know. That's a good question.
I have to research. That's the reason why me and the artists are taking a tour of the studio on Monday, because we got to talk all those details out. I'm thinking what probably will wind up happening is we'll do all the recording on like 1 or 2 reels of tape, and as they finish, we probably transfer them to Pro Tools, and maybe I'll be mixing off of Pro Tools that way. I'm not sure. I haven't really asked the artist if he's like diehard, like all the way through, mixing off of analog and all that stuff as well. So you never know. It might turn into a Bob Dylan thing where like, the rough mix I do at the end of the day is the mix, and then we just roll with it and keep going, so.
Yeah. What about console? Do you know what kind of console?
I think it's a SSL AWS, but there's a lot of cool vintage like tube gear and compressors and mic pre's and ribbons and all that stuff. And that's actually a really quiet console. I've tracked on those before. They're great. Very clean, but like I'd rather have clean than like not so great sounding and funky,
Yeah, AWS is a great console. I took a few of those down to Bonnaroo over the years to my studio there, and the whole thing runs off a 110 regular outlet plug.
Yeah, you just plug it in. It's insane.
It's totally quiet, no fans.
Troy Germano with the Germano Studios, when they opened up, I was like, "Where's the machine room for the console?" And he pointed me to like this rack in the back, and it was just like this big, and that was it. It was just it was a power cable and Ethernet cables. That's all it was. It was just insane. And it's great.
Dreaming of a career in audio or the entertainment business? SAE Institute Nashville, in the heart of Music Row, offers hands-on programs where you'll learn on professional-grade gear with industry pros, learning through real projects, not just lectures. Explore studio production, live sound, audio for film, and a whole lot more. Or take the entertainment business program to learn about contracts, promotion, and more. With diploma, associate, and bachelor's programs, there's a path for you. Book a tour today at nashville.sae.edu or call 615-244-5848. Well, that's cool, man. I mean, when was the last time you got a chance to do an all analog record,
Like start to finish, like
so for clarity, Rockstars, that would be not transferring it to the computer to complete it, but like it's on tape, it goes through the console, and then it gets
that's a
mixed
good question.
down.
That's a really good question. I wouldn't know. It's definitely more than 10 years ago.
It's 90s for me, but we still mix to a DAT.
Well, let's see.
And I mean, of course, my Bonnaroo studio was all analog because it was just there was no multi-track involved. It was live mixing through the console. Right. But I do remember being so struck by that, like sonically, when you don't. We take so much, computer stuff for granted because it's how we work these days. But when you have a chance to hear like a pure signal, like, just take a mic and plug it straight to your speakers, but be careful.
Yeah. It's, I really love the workflow of analog. It's just, like, not just like sonically, but like rewinding and being able to talk to the artist while you're rewinding, being more thoughtful about takes. It's like, just run it one more time. Let me see if I can get that one word. No, you're not doing that. You're trying to get an entire verse down, or you're punching in like a whole solo, and you can only punch in, there's only so little you can punch, before it starts to sound weird. So like bands rehearse more beforehand, the songwriting is usually a bit more complete by then, if you editing is like a major event, it's like, okay, we want to take part from that take and then part from that take, and you actually physically chop the tape, which I did that for somebody about 6 years ago because we recorded on analog, and like for some reason we couldn't transfer it to Pro Tools right away. We needed to do an edit, and like I just saw this guy sweating as I took a razor blade to his tape. He was like, "Oh my God, what are you doing?" And I'm just like, "No, it's simple." Andy Wallace told me this great story. He worked with somebody who didn't know anything about tape editing, and they did 2 takes of the song, and they were like, the guy was like, yeah, I wish I could take the intro from the first take and just tack it onto the second take. And he's like, yeah, we'll just chop it together. And the guy just started laughing as if he thought he was kidding. And then Andy sat there and he marked it and blah, 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 and put the thing on the editing block and pulled the razor blade. And as soon as he started swiping down to cut it, the guy just freaked out. What are you doing to my tape? He's like, I'm editing. This is what this is what we do, you know?
That's so funny.
I love doing it. I just love the physicality of it.
Yeah. What do you think you'd do for speed? Do you think you'd go 30 or 15?
I'll probably do 15, you know, just for tape costs. And I just like the low end bump on it, you know, as long as and I know that we're going to be doing, if we use this studio, it's a Studer 827. So it's a really great sounding machine.
It's a great machine. Yeah.
It's like the best.
And that's the kind of computerized one and everything.
No, that's the 820. The 820 was the one that was like digital meters, automatic alignment, and all that stuff. That's a great sounding machine. It even had Dolby SR card racks built into the bottom of it. But the 827 is a bit more pared down. But you could still, you do all the alignment by selecting the track and using like this little jog wheel on the top to tweak the you know, the high end and all stuff. So you don't need to sit there with a tweaker and, you know, and screws like you do on an MCI or a Studer 800 or something like that.
I spent a lot of time with a tweaker and screws and a headlamp.
Yep.
Because I needed to be able to see what the hell I was doing in the studio, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I don't miss that part at all.
And I never had the tweaker. It was always, so the tweaker Rockstars is a screwdriver that it basically has like a little safety ring around the outside of the flat head part, screw part, so that you can easily slip it over this post that has a little flathead screw in it.
And you can turn it and not worry about it slipping off. Yeah.
Right. But I never had, it was like, it was never around, or it was broken, or I couldn't find it. So I was always having to use just like a little mini eyeglasses screwdrivers. And you're just like fishing around trying to get the flathead
that is the worst
screw part.
That is the worst. Oh, I hated that. I mean, yeah. I don't miss aligning tape machines, but the good thing about the Studers is once you align them, they stay like rock solid. You maybe have to tweak it once a week or something like that, but you just put the tones up and check it really fast, and then it's like, yeah, it's fine. You know, I mean, you check it every day, but you very rarely have to do anything. You know, and just so that you guys know, you have like test tones that you play back and make sure everything's at 0 when you play back at usually 3 different frequencies, and then you use a piece of scrap tape, you put it in record, you monitor off the playback head, you put the same tone, you generate the same tones from the console, and you look and make sure they're hitting 0 as well. And if nothing's moved, you're fine. Just move on to the recording for the rest of the day. You check it every day, but you only align it like every other 4 days or something like that.
We're not even getting into biasing the machine.
Bias. Yeah.
But it was fun to discover all the things, because it's one of those things about tape that, like, the more you learn it, the more you start out and you learn, here's how you align the machine. You're like, okay, it's properly aligned. And then you learn, it's like taste based too. You can overbias, underbias. You can do all these treatments to tape. Steve Albini once told me, he was like, if you didn't have the bias meter, you can actually bias the tape by listening to the low frequency, and you're listening for rocks.
Yeah.
He said it sounded like jumbling rocks in the lows, like 100 or something.
Yeah, there's a bunch of ways to do it. Like the way I always do it, like at 30, it was like you overbias minus 1.5 at 10K or something like that. And there's all these, we don't want to get into that. It's a pain in the butt. But there's a million different ways to do it. But yeah, you start learning like, well, what level you record at, because 0 is just a number, but what does that mean magnetically? The hotter that you do it, the more saturation you get. The lower you do it, the more noise you get. So you have to kind of find this balance. I think I always did +3 over 185 or +6 over 185. I can't remember.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I was somewhere around there too. +3. I think it was like 456, 30 IPS plus 15, +3 over 250.
And then you had the GP9, and then you had the Bass F. The Bass F was like my favorite tape at the end there before they went out of business. But yeah, they all sound different, and they all have different qualities. And like, I know a couple of producers who reserve, like you can also use Dolby SR for noise reduction, which is super quiet. It pretty much eliminated all tape hiss. But I knew a guy who carried out a rack of just 8 SR cards, and he would only use them on channels like 16 through 23. you know, and that's where all his vocals and all his overdubs would be.
Right,
You want that stuff to be really quiet, but everything else would be, you know, so it was a really weird thing to have to align the machine, because you have to align it, then you have to align the Dolby after that, but only for 8 channels, you know, it's like, whatever. And I knew guys, I also knew a couple guys who would do different biases on different tracks as well. Like I knew one guy who would do that, and that was just absolutely batshit. You know, like he would like his reference level on the drums would be like +6, but everything else would be like, you know, +3, you know, because he wants to like saturate the drums, but he wants his guitars to be fine. There's so many different combinations you can do, you know, but you have to like commit, because like you can't just like every song had different, you know, alignments, you know, for different tracks. But yeah, it's
really fun. We did a session at Sunset Sound once when we were starting. We were going to be we knew we were going to try and stay on tape for as long as we could. Not a whole record, but like, you know, basic tracks or something. And I think we had a double machine setup going too. But we weren't sure which tape or which speed we wanted to do, because you know, the artist wanted to hear it and get a like, let's pick the best one. So we like aligned each channel differently.
Oh, Jesus.
And then like did some test recordings across it just to see what they sounded like. It was fun to do. You know, it was like probably a pretty expensive experiment.
Yeah.
But
one of my favorite things I did just toward the end of going completely Pro Tools was I did an album for an EP for this band called Mink. They're from Australia. And I had this great idea, because we were working at Power Station. Well, back then it was Avatar, but it's Power Station now. The Studer 800 24-track machine has 2 outputs per channel. Okay, there's an output 1, output 2. And you can run each output from a different head. So you can have like output 1 coming off the sync head, which is what you normally do. You can have output 2 running off the repro head. So what we did for basics, for basics, is we striped timecode we put timecode on the channel 24, and then set up like we would normally record, like, you know, so we used output 1, which is monitoring off the sync head, like you would normally do for punching and recording and stuff like that. But we took output 2 from the machine and took the time code and the audio from that and fed it into Pro Tools. And Pro Tools was locked to the tape machine. And as we were recording, we were transferring the recordings to Pro Tools off the repro head. And what was really cool about that is that I was able to print way harder, because the tape never wound on itself. So I never got any print through, right? Because it was literally the freshest recording you can make, because like the sound would be recorded, and then a 30th of a second later, because we were at 30 IPS, it'd be picked up by the record head and transferred to Pro Tools. So we just like sat there and record. So we were able to live record and transfer at the same time. And then every time we did a take, the assistant just sat there and swap the Elco connectors from the output of the tape machine to Pro Tools. And we listen up for Pro Tools to check out the take and say, okay, yeah, let's do another take. And then we had everything locked to time codes. So if we went back over the same piece of tape to do a second take, we'd use a new playlist, and then all the takes, because we were playing to a click track that was locked to time code, all the takes were lined up on playlists, one on top of the other. So we were just able to sit there and do edits all day long. And then we did the same thing when we did overdubs too. I'd make these sub mixes, and on a secondary reel, I'd transfer, like, you know, have a stereo drum mix, a bass guitar mix, a stereo guitar mix, a bass track, and maybe a reference vocal. And I transfer that from Pro Tools locked to a new reel, and then do all the guitar overdubs. And then when we finished all the guitar overdubs, just transfer them back onto the original takes again. So we basically every sound hit analog, you know, and then and was immediately transferred very quickly to Pro Tools. So we were able to like do the whole record on like 2 reels of tape. We just kept on alternating them, and it sounded so freaking good. It sounded amazing.
Yeah.
The guys at Power Station were like, that we've never seen anybody do that before. And it was something I just thought of at the very last minute. Is like, can we try this? I mean, if the output, can we double check that output 2 is working and it's aligned properly? And it was. And I was like, let's just try it for one song. And if it doesn't work, we'll just, record to tape, and then after the take is over, transfer to Pro Tools. But that doubles the amount of time it takes to transfer stuff and everything. Yeah. So we were able to transfer and record at the exact same time, and it sounded brilliant. It was one of the best sounding analog recordings I ever did.
So that's awesome, man. I actually did. I would do the same thing at my studio down here, but not with the time code thing. So I was listening to you talk about time code. And I was like, what's the time code for? What's the time code for?
Yeah.
And it's amazing that it's like just to like kind of make it so that they all line up for comping.
Exactly. So we put it, because I had a drum machine that was locked to, that's what we did. We would print the time code. Then I would print a click track before the band would start. And then the band would play to that click track. So the click would always start in the exact same spot, And so like, make sure that you always start on the third bar. So it would be like 1, 2, 3, 4. Then the drummer would count off 1, 2, 3. And then the band would come in on the third bar. And it was the same for every take. And then they all lined up. And if for some reason, they came in a bar early or a bar late, you can literally just look at the click tracks and line them up and shift them over by one and go, So it was brilliant. It was so much fun.
Well, what's so cool about your story too is I remember seeing the A80, the Studer, and seeing the back, and I was like, "Holy shit, this has got 2 outputs." Because I call it the tape bounce trick, where you'd mult at the patch bay, you might mult to 2. Let me think how we would do this. I'd mult the output of the mic pre and send one to tape and one to Pro Tools, and then like the tape one would bounce off the repro and come back in on a second track in Pro Tools or something like that. But when I saw the Studer, I was like, no way, this thing does it. It's built in. You can just patch right into the tape machine and it spits out both versions for you.
Yeah, exactly. It's fun. It's one of those things like it's like not many people have access to all that gear in order to do it because you need a synchronizer, you need a time code generator, you need a Pro Tools rig with a sync IO on it. You need all that stuff. It's not cheap at all, but if you can do it, it's spectacular. It's absolutely spectacular.
Yeah, it's a really cool trick. So Rockstars, if any of you are using tape and you've got a repro head, I definitely encourage you to figure out how to bounce it into Pro Tools in real time on a track that's muted.
Yeah.
So that's muted. You're not hearing it while you're recording. You're hearing the input version.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you can just line up the waveform. Because it's pretty, it'll slightly drift in and out with the line track. But if you like the sound of it, just keep the tape version of it.
It was pretty good. I remember measuring it, and it would be just like a handful of samples.
Yep.
Drift in and out because it's not that much of a delay from the record head to the repro head.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Steady speed. Well, that's cool, man. Right on. Well, let's see. What else do you think will be different about doing a record on tape when you guys go do this? How do you think?
Like I was saying before, it's just a little bit more thoughtful. You have to be a little bit more on your toes when you're recording because there's no undo button. So if you punch out that vocal, it's gone,
Yeah.
It's just something about the thing about I love about tape is it's basically you're applying at least one form of processing to everything on your album because most studios now. Computer-based studios, everybody will have like a mishmash of different mic pre's and different equalizers and stuff like that. And so each track will sound different, whereas having a console, you have everything coming through the same mic pre. Then you go into tape and you're applying the same amount of tape, saturation, coloration, what have you, to every track on the record. And it sort of kind of glues it together in a sonic way, not necessarily dynamically or anything like that, but it just has like a sonic like glue to it where everything just has that imprint of analog on it. And that's what I think. I mean, people romanticize analog, for the wrong reasons, I think, but when analog is working and it's tweaked to its perfection, it's just a glorious thing. I think a lot of things that people romanticize about analog is just are the imperfections, the obvious imperfections,
right.
Because I remember I was talking to Tony Visconti, and and he would say, back in the T-Rex days, I would have killed to have a Pro Tools rig, not because of the editing or anything like that, just because whatever the signal I put into tape did not come back at me. When I would listen to the track on input and then record it and hit playback, what came back was radically different, and I didn't want it radically different. I wanted it to sound more like what I put in there. But you learn how to take advantage of those sonic imperfections and lean into it more.
Native Instruments supercharges your music production with Complete 15 featuring Contact 8 new machine hardware integration and cutting-edge synths, samples, and effects. Contact 8 now gives you the chords and phrases tool for instant inspiration, the Leap tool for dynamic looping, and Conflux, a hybrid instrument for blending organic and synth textures. Plus, Machine 3.0 is here, giving you seamless control over Native Instruments gear and the latest NKS-supported hardware. Use the code ROCK10 for 10% off at nativeinstruments.com. Yeah, that's cool. And then something you mentioned, you brought up dynamics, and earlier you had talked about the elevated levels of aligning a tape machine.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like we should explain that to Rockstars. So the elevated level essentially means it's if you almost thought about tape like an 1176 or a distressor where there isn't a threshold button for compression, you just simply bring up the input level and then you hit the threshold and it compresses. That's kind of what happens in tape where, by doing the elevated level, it means that your peaks of level are in that squish in the tape zone, right?
Yeah, and you get that thing where it's the tape starts to saturate gradually, and there's this window where you're getting saturation, and past which you're going to be getting like distortion, obviously, and then so there's that area in the middle there that's absolutely beautiful, and also a lot of things that we do with compression, is an artifact of having to record to analog, because on analog you've got this very narrow. Relative to digital, you have this very narrow window of fidelity. If you record too quietly, you're dipping into the noise floor of the tape. You go too loud, you're hitting saturation and distortion. And so you've only got 25, 30, maybe 40 dB there that you can play with where everything sounds safe. So compression was pretty much invented to squeeze the dynamic range of a signal so it would fit in that magic area where you're not discoloring or distorting or noising up the signal whatsoever. And because of that, compression just became in and of itself its own thing, because we were just trying, because if tape was infinite as far as dynamics were concerned, we might not have that, we wouldn't be using compression perhaps as heavily as we do now, because there's all this room in it, we have all these dynamics that we can recreate, but we don't have those dynamics, and we're squeezing it and we're abusing it just to make it fit there. So it's a really weird, not weird, but it's an interesting thing to think about as far as why we use compression, what it sounds like, because we're trying to squeeze those dynamics onto tape.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Because you're bringing up the format, the recording format itself, as helping dictate what kind of dynamic we put on a record. But then there's also on the other end that we can't control is the listening format.
Right.
And it's sort of fascinating to think, if people all had perfectly quiet rooms to listen to music in with incredible hi-fi systems, we probably never would have invented compression. Probably just be making records with precision, ultra quiet parts and ultra loud parts like an orchestra.
Yeah, exactly. That's why, if you listen to a really great digital classical recording on a really great speaker, it's a mind-blowing experience, because it's just the way it just blows up at you when it gets loud and gets super, super quiet. And you gotta really lean into it. You can't really. There are very few records today that are done that way. I just think I think. Yeah, it's. We can talk about compression for days in this respect, because at one point, are you using compression? For me, there are three ways to use compression. You're controlling dynamic range, obviously. You're abusing dynamic range, so you're doing all buttons in with 1176, whatever. And I think the third reason, and one of the main reasons why I use compression, is for the color of the circuit itself. In 1176 on a low ratio, but it hardly moving, just has a sound because you're going through all those transformers or all those tubes or what have you. And for also the other thing for me is the more on a vocal, for example, if you really compress the living daylights out of a vocal, you get more of a chest tone out of a male singer. You just like all of a sudden like the tone of the vocal becomes much more apparent, but at the expense of like really exaggerated like T's, THs, S's, and consonants like that. And so, especially now in digital, you can do things to reduce those artifacts and still keep the tone, So like if you look at my vocal chain, you might see anywhere between 2 to 4 compressors on the vocal. And it's not because I'm desperately trying to contain the dynamics of the vocal. It's just like I know that like a TubeTech CL1A, emulation has this really cool thing that it does with the low end of a person's voice, whereas the 1176 does something to the mid-range, and like this guy does really crazy things to the top end. And almost all those compressors will have like a very low mix ratio attached to them. And then maybe at the very, very, very end, I'll have a limiter on there just to make sure it doesn't get too loud. And that's it. But like, so I remember sending a session to a friend of mine. He's like, Christ, you got 5 compressors on this vocal. I'm like, yeah, but look at the mix knobs. They're not doing anything. They're just, I'm just blending in. I'm just blending in a little bit of, so it's like, it's sort of like the Michael Brower parallel compression thing, but like on steroids, because you got like a compressor with a mixed ratio that's really low feeding into another compressor that's set at a high ratio, but the wet ratio is really low, and so on and so forth. So it kind of just sort of builds and cascades. It's not, none of them are really, they're all working really hard, but they're only contributing like that much to the sound.
Are there certain plugins that have the mix feature and others that don't, that are worth mentioning, or no?
Pretty much almost everything nowadays has a mix knob.
I feel like a lot of the the Plugin Alliance and the Brainworks stuff.
And like even the Wave stuff, like all the SSL stuff. Recently, they added the mix knob on everything.
Cool.
Or even a DBX 160 now has a mix knob on it. But if you have a plugin that you love to use that doesn't have a mix knob, again, going back to what I said earlier about the Kush UBK1, that doesn't have a mix knob on it at all. So what you can do is I take the VST version of that and stick it inside of the Blue Cat Audio Patchwork, I think it's called, and right there at the end it has a mix knob. So you can basically use it. You can turn any plugin into a plugin with a mix knob on it.
That's great. That's a great feature. I know I think Waves makes a rack.
Yeah, I think
that might allow things like that. There are parallel things. PreSonus was smart. They just put a parallel routing into their plugin architecture of each track.
Yeah, exactly. I think if you use Reaper has a mix knob on all their inserts as well.
What was the Blue Cat one again?
I think it's called Patchwork.
Patchwork, that's right.
That plugin is kind of nuts. You can load in like 32 plugins into that thing, and there's like 8 input plugins, and there's like 24 parallel plugins, and then 8 like post plugins, and they all have their own mix knobs and power knobs, and you can automate all the parameters and all that. And it has macros as well, so you can like turn like 5 knobs on 5 different plugins with just one knob and stuff like it. It gets pretty nuts. I don't even dive that deep into it, but I literally bought it just for that, because it had a mix knob on it,
Yeah, that's cool, because you could set up a whole chain inside it if you want.
Yeah, and they have a thing called an MB7, which is sort of like it looks like a mixer, but each channel is it's basically a 7-way crossover that you can put inserts in, so you can like apply like this compressor on your low end, and this on your mid range, and this on your top end, stuff like that, and that's kind of interesting as well. I don't use it. I don't break out that often, but every once in a while it does the trick,
Right on. Well, let's see. It's cool to hear about your mixing template. I know that'd be a massive topic just to keep talking about. Let's see, what else in your workflow is kind of templated that's worth mentioning too? What comes to mind about what about your day? What about your day of mixing? How templated is that?
Yeah, right. My day. I get up at 5 o'clock. No, I'm usually sitting at my desk anywhere between like 10:30 and noon, depending upon how much sleep I got the night before. I always try to I read through all my emails and stuff like that, and make any phone calls that I have to make, and then I try my best not to get distracted by all that stuff. It's kind of hard not to with your phone and all that stuff. But I find that it's really weird. I get more into a groove later on as the day goes by, because after like 5:30 I'm in the Midwest, like after 7, which is when LA shuts down because it's 5 o'clock in LA. It's amazing how quiet things get. Like your email stops going off, and my wife, she's self-employed as well. She doesn't get home until around like 8:39. So there's this 2-hour period toward the end of my day where I get the most work done. That the 80-20 rule. The 20 for me is that period between like 5:30 and 8 o'clock at night. Because all of a sudden, because by that point, I've cleaned up the mix. I've done my basic rides. I've kind of dialed in my sounds, and I'm pretty much half of the way, most of the way there. And those 2 hours is just me tweaking things, just like dialing it in and like just doing the fun stuff and sitting back and just listening with my eyes closed and seeing, what can be improved. But everything up to that point is just like hair pulling. That's all it is, I'm a one-man operation, so usually the first couple hours of a mix session is just cleaning up tracks. But again, we talked about it in an earlier episode. I use SoundFlow to kind of just organize my tracks for me, and import tracks and apply my presets and all that stuff, and just take the user session, the client session, and conform it to my template. And then the first thing I almost always do, even if I decide I'm never going to use them, the very first thing I do on every mix is generate triggers for my kick and snare. Like a MIDI trigger for each kick and MIDI trigger for each snare, as well as audio clicks, like audio triggers, for the kick and the snare. So that way, later on, if I decide I want to trigger using a slate trigger, I've got an audio click. If I want to use battery, which is where I usually how I MIDI trigger most of my samples, it's all ready to go, because nothing worse than like doing a mix and being like getting through the guitars and realizing, damn it, I gotta trigger that snare. It's just not going to work, and you have to stop and go and do that. So I always like get all of that done, so that way I don't have to change brains and go from like editing triggers to going from mixing to editing and making triggers. But
and so your triggers would be MIDI triggers,
MIDI triggers and audio triggers. I have 2 tracks in Pro Tools. Like my audio trigger track has actually 2 playlists. There's audio trigger dynamic, where the triggers follow the dynamics of the snare or the kick or whatever. And then there's another playlist that says snare trigger normaled, and that basically every trigger is exactly the same, dynamic. So it's just a solid line of triggers. But what's really cool about having those triggers beforehand is that you don't necessarily have to use them just for triggering samples. You could take, for example, the kick audio trigger and feed it into the side chain of your bass compressor if you want to duck the bass, with the kick. So you've already set up for that. Or if you've got a section of the song where the drummer's playing a ride, but he's hitting the snare too hard, and you don't have a ride cymbal, and you can't bring up the overheads because the snare's too damn loud, you can always duck the overhead with the snare audio trigger, or a MIDI trigger if you want to use a MIDI gate. So that stuff even if you don't use it for what they're originally for, you can use them for other stuff as well.
Oh, that's a cool, clever suggestion about the those times where you were saying with the ride might be the situation where you're not reading it clearly enough.
Right. You want to really want to push it in the mix, but the snare is just too overbearing. So being able to duck like precisely that snare every time it gets hit, so that way the ride just sort of stays where it is.
Yeah, that's great. I like that. And
then I use the MIDI tricks, the MIDI triggers, like on the kick drum. I don't use a standard audio gate. There's this company called Cable Guys, and they have a thing called Shaper Box.
It's a good one.
And way back when they first started out, their first product was a thing called Volume Shaper. And what Volume Shaper was originally for was to simulate that, like ducking a synth with the kick drum, so you kind of get that swell, that rink. And you basically you could trigger. It would just do this LFO. Like volume shape that you can set to a certain tempo. You could have it triggered to the tempo of the track. So you can say, okay, every chord note, just keep ducking, and you can draw the shape of the volume of the volume envelope you want. And I realized, well, wait a second. If you can do a ducking shape, you can probably do a gating shape. And it had a mode where you can trigger that envelope using MIDI. I was like, wait a second, that's a gate. So let me do that. And it's multiband. So you can have a different like volume shape for each band of your kick drum, so you can have like a really slow decay on your low end from everything from 100 down, and then a really fast one for everything like 1K and above. So you can chop off any like cymbal bleed that you have in the snare drum or the kick drum. So I use Volume Shaper to do my gating, but now that's been rolled into Shaper Box, which has a whole bunch of different modules like a filter shaper, a distortion shaper. So again, all these MIDI triggers that you're generating with the kick and the snare can be used for other things, you know, for like creative gating and stuff.
Chris Shaw, you're the best, man. I love it when you go off on a tangent like that.
I'm sorry.
You drop
but like
huge bomb on us. No, it wasn't a tangent. I just mean like
to me was like that was a big discovery for me when I figured that out. I was like, oh my God, you know, like drums that were useless are now actually useful, because I will go to the end of the earth to not use a sample. You know, like you know, so having all these tools at my disposal to shape a drum sound is important. It's really important. I think what's the name? There's a couple of really great plugins that do shaping right now, but I can't really think of them at the moment.
There's one that X for Records is, they make Serum, the synth, but they also make one called LFO Tool, I think it is. But I don't know if it does. So the key takeaway from what you just described, Rockstars, was this idea that Shaper Box now lets you feed a MIDI trigger input to trigger that
envelope.
Shape, that envelope. Because the envelope idea was really cool, but there were all those times where I thought, like, boy, it would have been cool to use this on, you know, on a band playing something, but since this isn't EDM programmed and it's not on the grid, I can't use it. Because typically a Shaper Box or a volume shaper, it just triggers on the tempo. So every quarter note, it redoes the shape. So if your drum didn't land perfectly there, you wouldn't get the same.
Yeah, exactly. And if you use a MIDI trigger, there's a speed knob that you can use to tell you how fast that, you know, when it gets triggered, how fast the envelope will run, you know.
Oh, cool.
And so it was really weird, because I discovered that I was actually mixing an EDM track for somebody, and I was having a hard time getting that sidechain, getting that effect. And I just happened to run across like something in one of my newsreaders, like that. Oh yeah, Volume Shaper just came out, and I was like, oh, let me try that. I was like, oh, this is great. And then I started digging into the parameters. Like, well, wait a second. You can trigger it with MIDI? Hold on a second. This is a gate. Because back then, MIDI gates were really expensive, like for plugins, you know. And then this thing is just brilliant, you know, absolutely brilliant.
Wait, when you say MIDI gates were really expensive for plugins, what do you mean?
A long time ago, like when back about 15, 20 years ago, I was only able to find one plugin that did gating that you could trigger with MIDI. And it was something like $200. I was like, I'm not spending $200 for a MIDI gate. No, I'm not doing that. You know.
It's funny the things that which plugins we look at and we're like, I'm going to drop some money on that, or like, no, that one I don't want to.
Yeah.
It also depends a big part on where we are in our whole career path too, and our budget.
Yeah, I mean, for me, if a plugin shaves, you know, a half hour off of mix agony, yeah, it's worth every penny. You know, it really is.
Totally,
you know,
totally.
And there's some plugins you just buy and or update without even looking at them. You know, like whatchamacallit, Fab Filter just updated, you know, Pro Q. It's Pro Q4 now. I didn't even test it. I was like, yeah, take my money, you know, because I know it's going to be good. You know,
that's great. I'm still on Fab Filter 2. I need to upgrade.
Oh, geez, dude.
iZotope is truly amazing for mixing and mastering your music. Check out the new iZotope Catalyst series featuring Plasma, Aurora, and Cascadia. Powerful tools designed to supercharge your mixes with intelligent processing. These innovative plugins give you dynamic control over saturation, reverb, and delay, effortlessly enhancing excitement and clarity. And now Neutron introduces new modules like Clipper, Density, and Phase, completing your flexible, fully equipped mixing suite. Plus, the new AI-powered Mix Assistant helps you create a custom signal chain for your audio, referencing professional instrument profiles or your own examples, with easy macro controls to dial in a perfect mix. Use the coupon code ROCK10 to get 10% off Plasma, Ozone, Neutron, RX, or any of the fantastic
Howdy,
plugins.
Rockstars. We're back now for the jam
session, aka the second half of the show. My guest today is Chris Shaw. Not to my knowledge, not my distant cousin, but we could be through the audio industry, I suppose.
Absolutely, yeah.
You ready to jam?
Sure.
All right, cool, man. Thanks for humoring my silly title names for the parts of the show too.
Right.
So I think you were just saying as we sat back down to start up the second half that you just got a nice treat in the mail. Something came in the mailbox. Was it? What was it?
It's another Bob Dylan box set that I've worked on.
Wow.
Bob Dylan and the band, the 1974 tour. This album was originally released, and it was called After the Flood, and it's a double album set. And so they decided to release every show, every song, and then this is just the Bob Dylan stuff. This is not the band stuff. This is just Bob stuff, and it's 21 discs, as you can see.
Amazing, and you mixed all that.
I mixed 10 shows worth. The rest of it is all board tapes and rehearsals and stuff like that. This was a serious undertaking. It was 135 mixes, I believe, or 138,
That's amazing.
And it was originally supposed to be, you got 3 months. Go ahead, just do it. So I started mixing it. I was taking my time. And then about halfway through, I was like, hey, man, you've only got like another month. And a couple weeks later, I was like, hey, can you get that done in 2 weeks? So it was like, oh, yeah, okay, sure. And it was a lot of fun.
Was there consistency to each show as far as like you could use the same approach to mixing each show?
Yeah, I mean, it was recorded, like they multi-tracked 10 shows at 10 different cities. Each city also had depending on the city, there was also 2 shows. It would be like an afternoon show and an evening show. Wow. And it was recorded by Phil Ramone, so it was like the recordings were pretty good considering. It was kind of an undertaking because like on the original album Before the Flood, when it was released, on 1 or 2 songs, they would like cut like the first half of this song from the afternoon performance and then the back end from the evening performance, because somebody made a mistake, whatever. But this had to be like a whole archival thing. So I had to go back and forensically find the parts that were not used, so like if they used part A of the song, but not part B, I had to go find the reel that had all the outtakes on it, find the part B, reattach it to part A, and then vice versa. So there was a lot of that. It was an undertaking, but with the tools that we have now, like with iZotope and stuff like that, and RX, and I was able to elevate the sound of these recordings immensely. Like one of the big drawbacks was, obviously because it's a live recording, Bob is sitting there, he's playing like a Strat, and his amp is like right behind him, and there's like a ton of guitar bleed in his vocal mic. And if you listen to the original mixes, overall the mixes are very, very, very bright because they have to deal with the guitar in his vocal mic, have the vocal up really loud, and then kind of put the band around it. But if the band is too full sounding, then his vocal and the guitar sound weird. So they wound up thinning out everything else as well. But with iZotope and the music rebalance, I was able to take that guitar and reduce the level of it by 12 dB. So I had more vocal than I had guitar. Then I can dig into his vocal and brighten it up a little bit, add more low end and stuff like that. And now all of a sudden the band is sounding better because I don't have to sit there and shave off low mids, in order for it to be heard around the guitar. Wow. So we were really able to do it. I got a couple of calls from a few engineer friends of mine who were just like kind of stunned, like, how'd you get all that bottom end out? Because the other one just sounds like they mixed it on cocaine, But other than that, it was once I got like the first show done, the rest of it came pretty easy. It was just a matter of like at the beginning of each mix, I have to sit there and denoise everything, get the hum out, do things to de-bleed stuff, and a couple songs the piano player would play drums as well. So in certain songs there were 2 drummers and no piano and stuff like that. And but like the audience mics were amazing. This is like 1974, so when he's doing something like It's All Right, Mom, I'm Only Bleeding, we're right in the middle of the Watergate crisis, And so when he sings the line, even the President of the United States sometimes has to stand naked, the crowd just goes like fucking bonkers, It's just this roar, it blows you back, Wow. But yeah, it was fun, But there was, no like digital trickery. There was like no, guitar tuning or guitar replacement or anything like that, or like taking the guitar from that take and overlapping it into the guitar of another take. None of that stuff went on. The only artificial thing I had to do was, like back when you made live records back then, you had 2 tape machines being fed from the console, and you put a reel of tape on each one, hit record in the first one, and as the concert's going, you're about a minute out from running out in the first machine. You put the second machine in record, and you basically ping pong back and forth. On one show, they forgot to start the second machine in time, and we lost like 4 bars of one of the songs.
No.
But
that reminds me of my projectionist days.
Yeah, exactly. It's like being a projectionist. But fortunately, it was in the middle of like the last chorus where they were repeating the chorus over and over again. So I was actually able to take 4 bars from like the prior 3 repeats and edit it in, so that way I was able to save the tape, save the song. But that was the only thing we did that was kind of like artificial, per se.
That's fascinating. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
Did you ever wonder if a listener would love to hear it play continuously versus would a listener love to just actually hear the tape roll off for a second and then start back up again?
Yeah,
Like,
I mean, there's like one or two songs where we didn't have an intro at all, or we're missing like the first like bar, and I tried to chop in intros from the other shows or other performances from the same day, and it wasn't working. So like on a couple of songs, you just kind of hear it go, and you're in the middle of the intro,
Yeah.
That's part of the charm.
Yeah, I was gonna say, what's that? What's the dropping in a record sound? Is like, yeah, it's so great. Yeah. I love that. I love the bands that would leave that in at the beginnings of songs. Yep. You hear like a lot of that happening, and then the song starts. More fun things about tape. I've
actually had people who've never worked on tape before ask me, "How do you do that? Like, how do you get that sound? Can you and like you're in a DAW and you're your Pro Tools, whatever. Like, I want to hear that sound. It's like, oh, I guess we could verify everything, you do a really quick verify on every track,
There it is, Chris. That's your plug-in to go make with somebody.
No, it's already done. Tape. It's verify,
Does the downward?
Yeah, like it does ramp up and ramp down.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Maybe I need to go try it again. All right.
Yep.
Although, if you called it just the tape plug-in and then just had a couple of good-looking
tape
pictures,
stop,
probably getting used a lot more.
Yeah, call it tape stop and tape start.
Yeah. Yep. I use the Waves, the Abbey Road vinyl one for vinyl stops. Sometimes.
Oh, I never tried that.
Yeah, it's pretty good for that. And then verify.
And I also think the Shaper box has a weird time stretch, has a weird time thing that does that automatically as well.
I'm going to have to go get Shaper box. I should have gotten it while we were taking a break during the podcast.
Yeah.
So what about iZotope, though? You mentioned that. So you're talking about RX, using RX for things. Have you, do you use that all the time? So you're like very, very familiar with navigating quickly around RX?
Yeah, I use RX like constantly. It's the greatest thing ever to happen to like electric guitar, like the last chord of a song and the hum and all that stuff. And electric bass as well. Like I think I haven't done a mix in 6 months where I haven't had to put RX on the bass to get rid of the hum on the DI side. Because I always really heavily process my DI. So by the time it runs through all the saturation, and if there's any hum anywhere in that signal, you hear it clear as day. So I use that all the time. And like, again, on live recordings, or like if there's a take of the guitar player singing in the live room with the band, you want to use a part of that. The music rebalance thing is excellent for that. You can just leave the vocal fader where it is and turn everything that isn't a vocal down by like 12 dB. And it's funny because people are using that to generate stems. I use it for noise reduction, like people.
Yeah, I find it really useful for mixing. I'm actually going to use it on a session coming up soon. Something I discovered recently that was very unexpected for me, which is, I think it's called dialogue or vocal isolate or dialogue isolate. And what I'm going to use it for is that we're doing a record where the drummer they're his songs. So it was
he wants to sing.
Maybe you should sing a scratch. We'll just put it at the drum kit, and then we'll get through the first arrangement of the song, and then I'll throw a dialogue isolate on it, suck everything out, and that's our guide vocal for the following takes.
For the following takes, yeah, you could do that.
Yeah,
absolutely.
We'll see. I don't know if it'll get all the drums out, but I've heard it get. pretty amazing stuff out.
It gets, when you try to eliminate the vocal, things get really strange. You get all these weird artifacts. But if it's just for a reference, I mean, I find that just bringing something down by like 12 or, 15 dB is more than enough, to isolate it enough where it doesn't really bother anybody,
Yeah. Another great place I found it worked really well is on voice memo, acoustic guitar vocal demos.
You can
easily strip the acoustic out or strip the voice out.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of which, did you know that voice memo now has an overdub feature? You can sing harmony.
Yes,
with your phone as the in the speaker mode.
Yep. I knew that.
Oh, the times they are changing, right?
They are changing.
Go ahead. Sorry.
That's about it. I mean, like I beta test for iZotope, so I know what the stuff that they're doing behind the scenes, and like they kind of slipped behind slightly when it came to the stem separation, stuff like that, but they're catching back up, because all the algorithms are improving and stuff,
Mm-hmm. World, that's kind of that nebulous world of, are we talking about, smart automation, or are we talking about AI, and all of that stuff is moving so quickly these days?
Yeah, and the thing is, you have to kind of make the distinction. It's really not AI, it's machine learning, which is like a subset of AI. It's not really making any decisions. It's just looking at a model, of a huge modeling database and applying what it learned from that to the signal they applied to it, So it's, I find that, depending upon the situation, and sometimes I have to use iZotope, and sometimes I even use some of the free online, stem separators to do things as well. I had to do a.
Don't forget Logic. That's also got one built in now.
Oh, really? I don't use Logic. I wouldn't know. Is it really good?
It works great as well.
Yeah, I did something for a very well-known composer, or his estate actually, and they took this pivotal song from this very, very, very famous movie where one of the actors is singing this song, and there's a string arrangement, but they're also walking around in an apartment and there's all this noise and stuff like that, and they decide they want to re-orchestrate the arrangement behind that same vocal. And so they got in touch with iZotope, and they got in touch with me, and it's like, hey, here's this recording. Do you think you can pull that vocal out? And I was able to pull it out, but like the intro where the person's walking around is like, bumping into a chair and a spoon on the floor or whatever. And I, just try as I might with iZotope, I just could not isolate it enough. But then I found this, squirrely, MP3 only, a stem separator thing online, and I was like, well, what the fuck, I'll give it a shot. And it magically took those things out. Didn't sound quite good. I mean, if you really sat there and listened to it, it was like, there's some artifacts there, but they were orchestrating stuff around it. So I sent it in, and I told the people, I was like, this is the best I can do with those first, 2 bars because of all the noise. And they got back in touch with me. They were like, dude, that's fucking amazing. How'd you do that? I was like, yeah, but there's still those weird artifacts. And they're like, no, we'll cover those up with, with strings, whatever. That's fine. Great. Thank you so much.
That's great. That's cool. Were you sort of fascinated with the old Peter Jackson Beatles remake? Yeah.
I mean, I watched that series. I loved that whole Get Back film. I think a lot of people might have found it boring, but I was so happy when that got released because it's one of the first times I've watched a documentary where you actually feel like what it's like to make a record. You know what I mean? Like just the hours of waiting around and playing that same song over and over and over and over again, and not knowing where it's going to go. It's even more maddening when you know where it's going to go. Like, like when they were doing, what was the song they were rehearsing over and over and over again?
Get Back or something like that?
No, it wasn't Get Back. It was, it wasn't Oh Darling. Shit.
Whatever.
No, what was it? It was like the bluesy song. Whatever, but they're recording it and they're not quite hitting it yet. You're like, no, that's not it. That's not the right melody. And then they finally do it. But like, it's like people I talked to are like, oh God, I found it so boring. I was like, and then you would never want to be in a recording studio because that's what it's like all day long, just listening to that same thing over and over again. Hey, what are we doing? Oh, we're gonna rehearse. Oh, darling, over and over and over again. It's like, okay, 4th day, we're still on this song. Okay,
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Like, what about for you? I mean, sessions. Did you find sessions were often working like crazy on the song in the studio, or did you find that it was more like work like crazy on it, rehearsing for something, and then capture that, magical first take or second take in the studio?
Well, it's like I only deal with, unless I'm doing pre-production, I'm producing the record. It's all about, obviously, the pre-production. I think once you get into the studio, it's just a matter of focusing on the performances. But, working with somebody like with Dylan or a couple other bands I work with, where like the band doesn't even know the song until you show up that day. And depending upon the musicians and how good they are, we're like, again, with Bob, I know I talk about Bob quite a lot, but his band is so good that like when they first learn a song, usually within 2 takes, you capture that magic moment because everything's still fresh, and it's like, oh wow, this is great, it's a wonderful song. And then the more you play it and re-record it and do take after take, the more the magic just kind of just magically falls away from it,
Yeah.
But for I find every moment in the studio, unless things are going badly, to be super enjoyable. I mean, I love the creative process. I love, as long as the session's constantly progressing, I don't care how many takes it takes to do a song. As long as everyone's still upbeat and everyone's still excited, and the momentum is there, then it's just like it's fun.
Are you ready to launch your career in the audio or entertainment business? SAE Institute Nashville, right here in the heart of Music Row, offers hands-on programs to prepare you for the industry. From studio production and live sound to audio for film and a whole lot more. You'll learn by doing, working with professional grade gear alongside experienced industry pros. If you're more into the business side of entertainment, SAE's Entertainment Business Program teaches essential basics like contracts and promotion to help you navigate the industry. With diploma, associate, or bachelor's degrees, there's a path for everyone. Plus, Career Services supports graduates as they take the next step. Want to see it for yourself? Immerse yourself in Nashville's exciting music scene and book a tour today at nashville.sae.edu or call 615-244-5848. Now, what about for you in the decision-making process? When you find yourself in a place where you're accumulating more and more options to make a decision from, do you have processes that help you sort through things quickly, or be able to, compare and pick the best one?
Well, I guess you would say something like talking about like maybe doing a vocal or something like that.
Sure, vocal counts a great example.
Yeah, I mean,
I just gave you 150 vocal takes. I would never. I can't deal with that. For me, it's like let's do 8 takes, at the most, and listen to it. And usually it's either like somewhere between take 2 and 5 or 2 and 6, where most of the good stuff is going to happen. And for me, I always just sort of go for big chunks. Let's find a take that has a really great verse. Let's find a take that has, a first chorus, a great take of the third. Then you go in and you start tearing it apart and nitpicking each individual syllable, whatever, if you want to do that. But yeah, I just don't have the bandwidth in my head to keep track of, more than 10 takes at a time. And not only that, but like, what are you going to get after 10 takes? I mean, it's one thing if like you're writing the song and you're just trying out tons and tons and tons of different ideas and you've got all these takes, you're not going to use them. Right. You're, at that point, you're just copying your writing. And you're comping together the melody. But if you've got the melody down and you're just doing take after take after take, you're either going to get it super, super early, or you're not going to get it at all that day. Or at the very least, after the 8th take, just stop for a few hours, move on to something else, and maybe come back to it. But when it comes to vocals, especially, I think it's really demoralizing for a singer. The singer would have to be unbelievably confident in their abilities to be hitting a song like more than 10 times, I think. Yeah. Because after that, it's like they start thinking about too much. They get in their own head. You've got like 5 people in a room staring at them while they're trying to do a vocal, and it's just way too much. Yeah. I mean, doing hundreds of guitar solos is one thing, but because you can look at a guitar and say that sucked, and the guitar is not going to know any different. You can still play the E on the 5th fret on the B string. It's always going to sound somewhat similar. But you tell a singer like that sucked, then
you're done for the day, you know. So
yeah. And the challenge with the singer too is sometimes we forget in the control room, like the singer's going to sing it again, but they're thinking like, well, what am I supposed to do different this time?
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And it depends. I mean, I think some singers might know what they're going to do next, or they might know what they're going for. I've had singers tell me to just shut up and just keep rolling it, you know, like don't even talk to me in between the take. You just keep repeating it until I tell you to stop. And that was the way we did it, you know?
And what I usually do, like when I'm working with a band for the first time and we're working on the very first vocal, you know, on the record or whatever, I always tell the singer, like, look, I'm going to let you roll like 3 or 4 takes. I'm not going to say a word. And that's not because I don't like what you're doing. I just want to give you time to like feel out the track, get your voice warmed up. And by the 4th take, if I've got something to say, or if I feel like you're struggling with something, I'll let you know. I was like, hey, what's going on with this verse? Maybe you might want to try that, you know. So don't misinterpret my silence for like indifference or like, you know, like disapproval. It's just I'm giving you space to do your thing, you know. But if any time before that you want to ask me something, by all means, ask me something, you know, and I'll tell you what's going on, you know. Yeah. But yeah, I just think you got to give everybody their space to work out what it is that they want to do, you know, because you don't. I think like one of the worst things to do is to give them the idea that what they're doing isn't right, or if it's wrong, or if it sounds like something else. I think that's one of the worst things you can do as a producer when you're producing a song is like the band's doing takes. And he's like, you know what, that sounds like that Coldplay song. And as soon as you say something like that, they can't get it out of their head, you know. And so I never say something like that until very late in the game. If it still sounds like that Coldplay song, then I have to say, guys, we might want to change a note here and there because it sounds too much like this, you know. But never say that too early in the game because you don't know if that's the final product or if they're working something out. Because if they're still working it out and you say that sounds like this, then you're done. You're never gonna get it. You're never gonna get off that. You know? Yeah.
What about when you? How and when do you say? So is that the finished mix? Is that the rough?
Yeah. Exactly.
What do you say then? I don't know. Hey, where are we at in the process? That's
I always do that. Like, you know, like when I'm mixing the record, I get like halfway through the record mixing and I look at the band and say, man, these are some of the best demos I've ever made. I can't wait to do the record. You know, it's like, demos, what are you talking about?
Yeah. Like, was that the scratch vocal?
Yeah, Rick Acoustic did that to me once. I mixed a record for him and, oh God, it was like, I mixed half of a record for him, like somebody else mixed the other side. And it was like, you know, 7 songs, and I spent like, you know, 10 days mixing these 7 songs and at Electric Lady, and we finished, and like 2 days later he calls me up and he's like, hey man, so I'm listening to these rough mixes we did and they sound awesome, man. So like, I can't wait till you really dig in. We do the final mixes next week. And I'm like, final mixes? What are you talking about? I just spent 2 days in each one of these songs. And I was like, oh, yeah, okay, sure. So what studio are we going to do the final mixes? And he goes, no, I'm just kidding, man. Sounds great. You want to come to mastering? But he left me hanging there for like a minute, like thinking, because I'm sitting there going like, he's working with Mutt Lange, and Mutt is one of those guys who'll mix a record 6 times, you know, and like, oh, maybe that's his thing. And oh, Jesus. Fucker.
That's hilarious, man. That's hilarious. So now was that Weezer?
No, that was his solo record, but yeah, we did Weezer shortly after that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so one was that Weezer Blue?
Album? The Blue album. Yep.
Yeah. I had questions about that if you don't mind me asking.
Sure.
Well, how do we get a drum sound like the Weezer Blue album?
You get Pat Wilson and you put him in Electric Lady Studio A. That's how you get that drum sound. I think it was a very simple setup. A lot of people get into this thing where they build a house around the kick drum and they do all these things. I used to do that very early on in my career, and I discovered that the benefits did not outweigh the whatchamacallit, the effort it takes to do something like that. Yeah, it's just like it takes forever. You want to move a mic, you got to take the whole tent apart and move it and then put it back together again. So like really simple, like the kick drum would be like a 421 on the inside, a FET 47 on the out. The snare would be a 57 on top, a 441 on the bottom. The overheads were probably a pair of 87s. Hi-hat, who cares? I have no idea what I did in the hi-hat. Toms were probably 421s, although since then I'm a big fan of 414s on toms. Probably 87s on the in the room, and I think I might have had a close mic on the like a close room mic on the drum set, which was probably a U69, I think. Yeah, it was like an M49, but like it's a stereo version of that. Oh, I can't remember the model number, but yeah, very simple. Yeah, I that's the way I've always mic'd drums. I don't spend too much time on drums. I mean, if the drummer's good, it's really simple to do a drum micing. I just remember that his cymbals were really big and really heavy, because every time you hit a crash cymbal, they would just ring forever. So doing punch-ins was always a pain in the ass, because we'd always have to get the crash from 2 bars before, so we had to pick it up from there and then punch in a bar later, because we needed the ring from the cymbals and stuff.
Oh, because you guys were cutting to analog.
Yes, all analog, tape editing, the whole nine. Yeah, I think like the last song on the album, Only in Dreams, there's like 4 or 5 edits between 3 different takes. Yeah.
Wow. And so the master tape that you're recording on would have splices all through it for various edits. What would be a process? Would it be like record the drums to tape, edit tape drums together, or punch in on drums? You just described a punch, I guess. Yeah, we occasionally we would punch, like occasionally we might punch a bar or two, or or a section, because the band did play to a click. So, and you can actually hear the click in the intro to the Sweater Song if you listen very, very carefully. Oh, nice.
You hear ba-doom, deek, boom, deek, ba-dap, doom, da, da, doom. It's funny. I was actually I saw the band play on the 30th anniversary tour last year, and I was talking to Pat, hadn't spoken to him in ages, and I was like, you can hear the click track in the Sweater Song. He says, no, you can't. I'm like, yes, you can. He goes, Chris, I know you can. I was like, fucking put it on right now and crank it up. And he was like, holy shit. And he's like, and then like a month later, he calls me up and says, I can't not hear it now. It's like every time I hear it, it's there.
We didn't have iZotope RX back then.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, if they ever, you know what? Obviously they remastered it for the box set that just came out, but I didn't know about it until they had finished the mastering session. I was like, oh, you should have told me. I would have somebody go in there and just like RX those 2 ticks out of the intro. But we were talking.
It's funny because stuff like that, like to my previous question, it's almost like leaving the mistakes into some jazz performance or a solo. It's like, which one's actually better in the end? I mean, it's like we wouldn't have a story to tell if there wasn't the 2 little clicks in there. I mean, it didn't hurt the song, right? It didn't hurt
exactly.
it.
I just mixed a record where it was a very quiet ballad, and they recorded the Rhodes, and her Rhodes was really hissy sounding, like unbelievably. Like it was like a, and it was clear as day in the mix. And I was like, oh, let me get rid of that. So I took RX and I got rid of it, and then I mixed the song. And I kind of went, let's hear it again with the hiss back in. And I printed another version with the hiss back in. And it was a very moody song. And I sent it to the artist and the producer. I was like, I know this is super noisy, but I really like it. What do you guys think? And it was unanimous. They came back and said, oh yeah, the noisy version is so much better than the clean version, because it is adding that mood to it, And like the absence and the addition of noise is such a great production trick. Like if you listen to Closer to God by Nine Inch Nails, right? It starts off with that drum beat, and there's a hiss throughout the beginning. Boom. And then when he gets into the second part of the song where he goes, help me, I've torn apart my... They mute the hiss. And all of a sudden the whole mix kind of goes like this. And you don't know what happened other than the fact that there's a bass, but there's something else vibe-wise that just kind of happened. And it wasn't until I listened to it like 8 times, like, wait, they muted the hiss. The hiss is gone. And it just it totally changes. It's like a really cool like scene change in the song.
Yeah. That's
anyway,
clever.
enough of that tangent.
That's cool. That's a good one.
The Blue Album. Yeah.
So the Blue Album. So and then mix wise, I mean, things I noticed about it when you brought up the kick and the snare is the kick has a thickness to. It's got like a pillowy puff thickness to it, tonally, that just sounds so great. Which I guess is that. Sort of maybe the front head quality.
Yeah, it's the 47.
The 47.
Yep.
And the way it's treated in the room. And the snare's got that, bright, crisp thing. It's just,
yeah,
it's interesting, you know?
I mean, and that was back in the days because we were on analog where I printed the top and the bottom on the same track. So it was sort of like once you made that balance, you couldn't undo it. So there might have been one or two songs when I mixed it, I probably would have thought to myself like, too much bottom snare. All right, well, I got to deal with it, you know. But that's what you had to do because you need the room on tape to have, you know, an extra track.
Right, of course, yeah. And then the other thing was just the cymbals are just so pleasant the way they sit against everything, you know. So they're never like, there's never an aggression to the cymbals. At least, you know, there might be somewhere, but in what I was listening to,
I think it's because he used really heavy crashes, so they weren't super bright, you know. Like, that helped a lot. It was you know. And when we mixed the record, I know this too, is that was before I started using parallel compression on drums. So like the whole album, the sound of that album is the bus compressor on the SSLE, you know?
Wow.
And I remember that being that's the one thing about that album that mixing that I remember the most was that it was a struggle because you wanted the drums to be loud, but if they got too loud, they overtook the mix. And if they were too quiet, like the pumpiness of the compression was all due to like just very slight moves on the kick and the snare in the mix. If I pushed the kick drum too loud, then all of a sudden it was kick heavy. If I had it down too quiet, it would get overshadowed by the guitar. So it was this very delicate, like 2-3D balance between guitar, bass, and drums that would radically affect the compression on the bus, because I used to on the SSL, and I still do on an SSL, use a very high ratio. I use 10-1 with either the slowest or second slowest attack and the fastest release. You know, because I love the sound of the pumping of a SSL compressor pumping on the stereo bus. But that was a big struggle because every once in a while there's somebody in the band be like, yeah, we need to make that tom feel really loud, and like on the Sweater song, at the very end, just on the Sweater song, just before the guitar solo, there's a tom build, and the whole mix just kind of folds in on itself because I'm pushing the toms up, and everything kind of gets sucked away by the toms, and then it comes back in. And I remember just struggling with that for like hours. And at one point, I think I just threw up my hands, like, "That's it. I can't do anything more. That's it. Whatever it is right now, that's what we're going with." You know. Because, you know, when you're making a record, especially the first album by a band, you don't know if it's going to be a hit or not. You don't know how it's going to be received, you know. And I'm sure for the first couple of years after that record was released, when I would hear that tom fill, I'd be like going, "Ooh, you know, I should have done that better," you know. And then like a few years later, when I started using parallel compression on drums, like almost all the time, thinking to myself, "Oh man, if I had just done this on the Blue album, things would be different." But that's just what happened, you know.
What a great story, man. That's awesome. And so you said 10-1 was a go-to
for me
ratio on the two bus compressor?
Yeah.
That's wild. Cause when I've had mine, you know, an SSL style compressor here or a plug-in, you know, I remember thinking 4-1 seemed about where I wanted to be for most things. And then 10-1 was sort of hard hitting.
Right.
In a good way. So maybe I didn't push it enough, you know, but now I'm going to go be like, I got to go see what 10-1 feels like again.
Yeah. I mean, I would play with it constantly, but I mean, I might've gone whatever the next click down from 10-1 it is, what is it? 2, 4, and is there an 8 on there? I can't remember.
Maybe it depends. I think there might be.
I might have gone down, maybe on a song I might have gone down, you know, 1 because it was too much, but I just something about the aggressiveness. I mean, you're making a rock record, so you want to be aggressive and you want things to kind of hit, smack you in the face. Yeah. You know, because we were mixing and we were always talking about like, we want the guitars on this record to sound just as loud, if not louder than the guitars on Creep by Radiohead. You know, so that was sort of our reference. So like 10-1 just seemed to push the whole thing along quite nicely, so that way the drums could be heard. Because that was the one thing about the Radiohead records that I personally, you know, I mean, don't get me wrong, I love the Bends by Radiohead. But one thing about a lot of British style mixing is sometimes they push those guitars so loud that the drums just kind of get lost, you know. And you know, coming from a hip hop background, I'm like, that can't not happen. But in retrospect, you realize that the drums get lost when the guitars get loud for a reason, because like it makes the guitars even more louder when the drums get lost. So for me, I was fighting with why can't I have both? Why can't I have the drums loud and the guitars just like hit you over the head? So that was the whole struggle during mixing of that entire record for me. I mean, not a struggle, but it was just sort of like the thing that was always forefront in my mind.
That's great, man. Rock your music production with the updated Complete 15 bundle from Native Instruments, featuring Contact 8 and expanded hardware integration. Whether you're crafting cinematic scores, EDM bangers, or experimental soundscapes, Complete 15 gives you industry-leading synths, sampled instruments, and creative effects to bring your ideas to life. Contact 8 introduces powerful new tools like chords and phrases for instant inspiration, the Leap tool for dynamic looping, and Conflux, a hybrid instrument blending organic and synth textures in real time. And with Machine 3 now available, you'll enjoy even tighter integration with Machine Plus and the latest NKS-supported hardware from brands like Akai, Korg, and Novation. Plus, Complete 15 features revamped Massive X, Guitar Rig 7 Pro, and iZotope 11, helping you shape, mix, and master with ease. Use the code ROCK10 for 10% off at nativeinstruments.com. Oh, the guitars. That's what I want to see. What happens is I have an idea for the question I want to ask, and then you keep going, and I'm so interested. Then I get to the end, and I'm like, "What the hell was my question?" It was more about the guitars on Weezer. So, what about those distorted guitars sound so great, man. They just sound so cool. Weezer's got such a distinct guitar tone. What stuff do you remember from that, or that's worth mentioning? How about how you would have recorded them? Let's assume for a minute that it's up to the artist to get the right tone out of the amp or something.
Yeah, I mean, I think back then my go-to, because this is before. I'm not going to say it's before the Royer 121 existed, but before I was aware of them. They may not have been making them back then. Was it 93? Yeah. So I probably was using a 421 and a 57. That used to be my go-to combination, and I probably used a different mic on a different speaker. So like it would be 57 on one speaker, 421 on the other. I mean, and I'm sure a couple years later I started putting both of them on the same speaker for more cohesion. And then maybe I might have had, and this is something I did back then. I might have had a 414, maybe about 6 feet back. That I might. I add in just a little bit, because you do have phase issues when you do something like that. And
and the guitars would have been in a pretty sizable room space as opposed to
during
the
tracking, we probably had everything kind of isolated. I know we would probably had Rivers' guitar in the sound lock between the control room and the live room at Electric Lady. And the original guitar player who did all the tracking was this guy named Jason, who quit the band before it was released. We probably had his amp buried in behind some gobos as far away from the drums as possible. And then the bass amp was probably in this little doorway at the back of the room between the outside hallway and the live room. There was it was like a double door, but they were 4 feet apart, so you can actually fit an amp right there, barely. It was probably just that. We tracked on a Focusrite Forte, so those were the ISA 110s, and those were probably just combined onto a single track, those mics, and maybe on the way to the tape machine, I might have passed it through. Yeah, I probably put it through these 1081s that the studio had racked up in the rack behind us, and then that into an 1176 to tape. So the 1081s
were your EQ.
I would EQ the mics individually as well sometimes, and then the 1081 would just be the general EQ before it hit the compression, and then that would go to tape. And yeah, it's my recording chain for almost everything I do is usually that simple. I don't like spending like hours and hours and hours getting tones. To me, the performance is way more important. So I learned very early on how to get a really good sound using the same chain. Pretty much this chain always worked pretty much on 95% of all the guitar players I would work with. I think when we got into the overdub stage for overdubbing guitars and solos, I think I might have added, believe it or not, a D112 to the mix as well. And
Really?
Use that, yeah. The football shaped one,
Yeah, so it's usually in a kick drum.
Yeah, but like it was just one of those things I tried. Like I always, every record I make, I always like use a microphone I would never use before on something else just to see what it would do.
Yeah.
Well, it's a kick drum mic. Let's put it on the guitar, see what happens. And we would add it in. And when I'm blending the individual mics, let's say the 421 and the 57, what I usually do is I set a level using the VU meters for each mic so they're hitting on the analog meters at like -3. So that when you add two of them together, you get to 0.
Right.
And then I would flip the phase out of one of them and then blend them together so they would cancel out as much as possible. And when you're listening to the inverted polarity version where you've got whatever you're hearing, when you flip it back, goes away. You know what I mean? So like wherever if you're hearing like some weird, if you like have two mics on an amp and you invert the phase and you combine them together and you're hearing like this weird thing at 3K, well, that weird thing at 3K is going to go away when you put everything back in polarity because.
Right.
So what I would do is I would flip the polarity and then blend the mic so that the most annoying frequencies were present, and then put the polarity back in. Or I would if I'm hearing a weird thing, I would just maybe on one of the mics on my EQ to emphasize that frequency while it was out of phase, then pop it back out so they would cancel out. So you can do all kinds of crazy tricks like that.
Wow.
But in the long run, it's just for me, when I'm getting guitar sounds, I'm listening on the NS10. I want it just to sound like there's a very small version of that amp sitting on top of the console. I'm hearing what I'm hearing in the live room in the control room.
So you would typically have an NS10 up in front of you for the recording.
I'm always using NS10s when I'm recording guitars.
Even mixing now in your setup now.
Yeah, in my setup at home, I've got my interface, the Matrix Studio, has built-in room EQ for all of your speaker outputs. So my NS10s are EQ'd to be a little bit more flat than they normally than you would normally expect them to be, because they're kind of close together. When you have NS10s close together, you get that really crazy hump in the mid-range, which drives me nuts, and I always wind up carving out way too much like 200. So I'd rather just flatten out the EQ on the NS10 so I could just mix the way I think they should sound, and then I A/B that against my Genelec 1031s. But yeah, I like to do my tracking for guitars on the NS10s. It just translates better for me from different systems.
Were you mentioning earlier that the Blue album just turned 30?
Yes. Yeah, 30. Next question.
I guess next. How's that feel? So let's see. You just mentioned that you told us about so Bob Dylan and the band, the 1974 album. That's the one that just came in.
Yeah.
That you were showing us.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, I'm just going to keep flipping through some questions here. Share a story of working with Ice Cube.
Oh God!
And also, how was looping different back then than it is now, if that's a relevant question?
Well, looping was a black art back then. Like today, you just you go into your you just you edit the loop that you want to put into your track, and you drag it onto a track with warping turned on, and it just automatically conforms, and you're done. Whereas back then, you had like let's say an Akai S900, and you would sample the beat off the record or the loop off the record, and of course you had some stuff in the front and the loop that you had to get rid of, and the stuff at the end of the loop you had to get rid of. So you had like a little bit of sound. You had a little bit of whatever before the downbeat of the loop, and then a little bit after the fourth beat. And so you'd have to sit there with a keyboard attached to the sampler and hit it repeatedly. While you trigger the sample repeatedly while like trimming the front of the sample, and you didn't have a waveform to look at. It was just a number. So you'd sit there and hit it and hit it and hit it and hit it. And so finally, every time you hit it, you were right on the downbeat of the song. And then you would, if that was like if that loop was the foundation of what you're going to make your song out of, then you'd have to figure out what the tempo was, and then you'd use a drum machine to trigger a MIDI note every downbeat, on a downbeat of every bar, and re-trigger that sample over and over again. Of course, it wouldn't quite line up because it would trigger too fast or too slow.
Which is kind of what made it so cool, too.
Yeah, right? But you get it'd be like doom, doom, dap, ba doom, 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 dap, ba doom, ba doom, dap, ba doom, doom, dap. And it's like, no. So what do? The only way you can make it fit is you have to speed the sample up until you start looping properly, and you continue to speed it up until you start hearing a flam at the end of the beat because you're going into the next part of the recording, and then you'd back it off. So now that's your part, and then you lay that on tape, and then it would like laying down a beat would take you a good 20 minutes to a half an hour, just because you had to
because once you had it figured out, you had to print it onto the tape.
You had to print it
to finish.
And at Green Street, we had this method, like if we knew what the tempo of the song was, we would lay down a click, and then we would use that click as our reference, and then you'd have this box made by Roland called the SBX80. And what the SBX80 would do is it would convert a time code to MIDI beat clock, which is what drove the tempo of your drum machine. And then you had an offset. So you can say, well, the song starts at 1 hour, and then you'd have your click track, and then you lay your first beat down, and then you sample the second beat that would go on top of it, and then you play them together, and you realize they're not quite lining up for some reason. It's either because of the way it's being triggered, or it's the way you have the sample edited. They're just not lining up. So what you would do is you would sit there and you would pan the original loop to the left, the new loop to the right, and then hit play, and then record the results onto a 2-track machine, right? And then you'd go back to the beginning of the song, and then you listen to just the left channel, which is your original beat, and then scrub the tape until you found where the kick drum was hitting, and you would mark it with a lead pencil on the tape machine, on the playback head. Then you turn off the left channel, you turn on the right channel, which is your new loop, do the same thing again. You'd scrub it, and then you'd find where that beat is starting, and it'd be off by this much or whatever. And for those of you who don't know, time code is hours, minutes, seconds. We would be doing 30 frames per second. So there'd be 30 frames per second. Every frame would have 80 bits. So every second of tape had a resolution of 2,400 ticks, right? And if you took a ruler and you measured the distance between the two loops that weren't hitting properly, for every millimeter difference between the two, you would change the offset by 3 bits. So then if the loop was running late, then you'd go into the offset. So now instead of starting at 1 hour, you say start at 59 minutes, 59 seconds, 29 frames, and 77 bits. So that would shift the whole thing. And then you mark that down on the track sheet. Like, okay, the offset for this loop was this. So that way if you had to reprint it later, you didn't have to go through that whole rigmarole. And then you print the next thing. And then you could do the same thing with drum machines. If you wanted the kick to line up with the loop, you can do the same thing. And so at Green Street, we would literally, mathematically, you offset all the parts, all the individual drum hits, all the individual loops, the bass lines, everything. So they all lock in on the downbeat and on the click. So it was just this. It would just take forever.
And were you describing that they would also drift from the beginning of the song to the end of the song?
No, they would say pretty solid. You know, maybe they would drift. Like we discovered at one point that if you were locking up an MPC 60 to a SBX 80, for some reason it wouldn't lock properly until about bar 4, and all of a sudden around bar 4, it would just sort of okay, yeah, I know where I am. And then do that. So if we were ever using MPC 60, we made sure we had 4 bars of pre-roll. It's just all these tricks that we did. But we had the Green Street. We had a reputation for that. It's like if you got stuff you got to line up, just bring it to them. That you can figure out. They can synchronize anything. And that was sort of our deal. But some artists
from that era that you miss. Gear or process.
Well, it was,
or the art itself.
The art itself, there's something about like I said, not many people knew how to in the late 80s, early 90s, like looping and putting beats together was sort of like an unknown, and you didn't have the internet, you didn't have YouTube to say how it was done. So every studio sort of had their own way of doing things, it's sort of like, well, how did they do things at Motown? How did they do things at Abbey Road? Like in hip hop, there was like a distinct difference between how they did things at like Green Street versus how they did things at like Chung King, or how they did things at Right Track, or how they did things at Calliope, on all the different studios, or how they did stuff out in Long Island, So it was just sort of like this, every studio kind of had their own little rep,
That's wild, man.
Yeah, but it was fun. It was more, there was a lot more problem solving back then than there is today, I think. Or they're just that the problems are different.
And we kind of dove right into that because I brought it up, but any other stories or anecdotes about or memories about working with Ice Cube? What's he like?
Cube was unbelievably professional. I loved working with him. It was kind of amazing, that he came to the East Coast to work with them. I mean, there's lots of documentaries online where he talks about that, but it was because the Bomb Squad, which is Public Enemy's production team, produced America's Most Wanted, and the Bomb Squad was very prolific. They wrote lots of tracks, not specifically for any artist, but they would just write beats and stuff like that for themselves, and they would give them to whatever artist they thought would work with them. But I remember there was one song that they had written specifically for one artist, and they accidentally played it for Cube, and Cube was just like insisting, like, no, that's my song, no matter what that we're doing that. And it was originally written for this guy named Son of Berserk, and it was a song called "The Band Gets Swivvy on the Wheel." But Ice Cube took it and he commandeered it for a track, and I'm paraphrasing here because I don't want to offend anybody, but the song was called "The Trigger You Love to Hate," but not Trigger. Okay.
Right.
So, but Son of Berserk eventually did release his version, but they wound up changing the arrangement and all that stuff. But that guy, he is an incredible rapper. It was loads and loads of fun working with him. Although for a very long time he never knew my name. He would just refer to me as "Yo you." So it was funny. He never really got interested in having a conversation to me until one day I walked in with a new pair of Air Jordans that he hadn't seen before. So it's like, "Yo, man, what's your name?" I was like, "Chris." "Chris, where'd you get those Air Jordans?"
How would you dress back in the day, man? Did you?
As badly as I dress now? No, I was totally not in style. I wore flannel shirts before they were cool, and buttoned them up too high, and it's funny. Like, yeah. No, I was a really geeky guy.
Are you recording your own music or other people's music in your studio, but you're having trouble figuring out how to get your mixes to sound great? Do they sound weak and distant or lack punch and clarity? Well, I've got a gift for you to help you take your mixes from sounding like basement demos to sounding a lot more like professional mixes. And it's my free course called Mix Master Bundle. This course will show you how to get pro-sounding mixes from your home studio with free and stock plugins in Pro Tools. And the best part is, these mixing techniques will work for you in any DAW, whether you're in Logic, Cubase, PreSonus Studio One, Reaper, or anything you can think of. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now, and you can find the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. Well, you played bass, right? You played bass with LL Cool J.
Yeah.
And you probably told that story previously, but that was your number one instrument coming up and playing music?
No. I'm a guitar player. That's my main instrument. Right. Yeah. I was like, to recap very briefly, the band I was mixing this band that got hired to be the backup band for the MTV Unplugged record, and they didn't have a bass player. And we were talking about the songs they were going to be doing, and they were like, "Well, we're going to do, Can I Kick It with Tribe Called Quest?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, it's Walk on the Wild Side," and I'm like, I'm naming all the samples of all the songs they're going to do, and the artist was like, "Hey, do you have an acoustic guitar I could borrow?" I was like, "Yeah, sure." He goes, "Hey, why don't you come to rehearsals? I'll get you a bass." I'm like, "What for?" Because you should play bass because we don't have a bass player. I'm like, "I'm a guitar player." Is that? Come on, you can figure it out. And that's eventually, 2 weeks later, I'm playing bass behind LL Cool J.
That's great, man.
Yeah,
that's
really
awesome. And then did you find yourself continuing to play instruments through your whole recording and production career? Or did you
I wind up playing a little bit of something on most of the records I produced, not because that's my mission in life is to play on every record, I'm on. But usually I wind up playing a little something. Even sometimes it's just some small parts, like some keyboard lines or some piano chords or, an occasional guitar part. But it's not something I insist on, but I'll do it if I find it's necessary. Occasionally I'll add a guitar part when I'm mixing if I think it needs something or might replay something, but never without letting the band know. I'm always very upfront when I don't try to sneak onto somebody's record. I actually played guitar on a Cheap Trick record I produced once, and which was kind of treading treacherous ground. But I sent it to the band. I was like, "Look, I added this guitar line, these two and literally just two chords. Let me know what you think." And Rick Nielsen called me back up. That sounds great. Yeah, no problem. He said, "Your name's not going on the record, though." I'm like, "That's fine." I know, I did it. So.
It goes on the podcast later on.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Have you got a minute you got time for a couple more questions? All right, cool. Here we go. What was the coolest thing about working with Public Enemy, Night of the Living Bassheads? And the follow-up to this question is, did Flava Flav tell you what time it was?
Flava Flav always told me what time it was. What's really great is that people now know that Flava Flav is Flava Flav 24/7. You know what I mean? But back then, people thought that was just a character. Which is funny. Night of the Living Bassheads. I don't know how much work I did do on that, but yes, I do remember working on that. There are more samples on that one song than any other song on that record, I believe. And I think me and another engineer were the ones who slotted in all the individual unique samples that are there. I think they used Fame by David Bowie at one point. I remember having to put that in and stuff like that. They're just nuts. I mean, I remember just looking at those guys like they had two heads, while we were doing it. But at the same time, thinking, "This is great, but who's going to listen to this?" But that was the one thing. That was the one thing about the experience about making that record is that we all knew it was something really, really cool, but I don't think any of us had the idea of what the impact of it would be.
It impacted me, man. I was driving around with my. I probably said this before, but I was driving around with my. I think it was like a 1970 something. VW microbus with the side door wide open in St. Louis, and my box speakers that I placed in the back and Velcroed, and they're cranking Public Enemy up at maximum volume.
Right.
In the 80s, I loved it.
Yeah, like I said, we didn't. Like I said, we knew, but sometimes you make a record and you love it because it appeals to your interests and your sensibilities, but you're not too sure if anybody else is going to get it.
Yeah.
And especially considering what hip hop was before that record, we had a hint of what they were going to be doing because Rebel Without a Pause was a pretty a big hit, but we didn't think that the public. I didn't think that the general public would be able to sustain interest on a record like Rebel, but across 45 minutes of a whole new record, like that sample heavy, that noise heavy, kind of thing, and people ate it up, That record's a touchstone for me. I didn't realize how much of an impact that record would have on me as an engineer, and I was only one of 5 or 6 people. I think if you tallied up how much work I did on that record, it was maybe 20%, if that much. But people wanted to work with the Public Enemy engineers after that, and so when that record came out, I had my own set of clientele at the studio, as did all the other engineers. We all developed, our clientele because Nick Sansano, the guy who did the majority of the recording on that, he was booked solid after that record came out. And people couldn't work with him, and it was just Chris worked on that record as well, and so okay, we'll work with Chris.
That's great.
And so that's kind of how it happened. And then because of the Bomb Squad using Green Street as their home base, we just wound up getting our hands on just so much stuff, like remixes from Madonna and Janet Jackson and Paul Abdul, and working with Belle Biv DeVoe and Bobby Brown and all these other people, and it was just nuts. It was just absolutely crazy.
So Rockstars, just a reminder, we have a totally amazing playlist of discography of Chris's in the show notes. So if you just scroll down and click through, you can go listen to a bunch of these records we're talking about too. And I highly recommend you do because it's very fun. Especially going to listen to some Tribe Called Quest too.
Oh, I love working on that record. I only did 2 songs on Low End Theory, but they're the best ones on the record. So,
which were your 2 songs on that?
I worked on these 2 songs. One's called We Got the Jazz, and Check the Rhyme is the other one. And I did that record after that same MTV performance with LL Cool J. Tribe was on that performance. And then when I was talking to Q-Tip after it was over, he asked me, he's like, what do you do? And I'm like, well, I'm an engineer at the studio. So I go, well, great, I'll come down. Let's work together on a couple of tracks. And like a week later, we wound up recording those 2 songs together.
That's great, man. What a blast. All right. So total about face here.
Yeah.
If you were doing a recording session right now, how would you mic up Bob Dylan's acoustic guitar?
It would probably be a 414, pretty close to the bridge near the upper strings, pointing away from the hole. And then I have a B&K 4011 small diaphragm condenser. And I would probably have that somewhere near the 12th fret and maybe angled slightly more toward the sound hole. And that's my usual starting point. And then maybe, well, since it's Bob, I might have like a 47 and about 2 feet back of that, just to capture an overall, and then figure out which combination or
right.
or just
Make
which
sure
one microphone. Yeah, it's for working with Bob. It's just he doesn't like a shit ton of mics and everything, but I put up as many as he will tolerate. Because sometimes I'll be setting up mics. He's like, "What do you need that one for?" And I'm like, "All right, that's the last one I'm going to put up." Just to cover bases. That's all.
Yeah. That's great, man. What was your role in Soul Coughing Irresistible Bliss?
I mixed Super Bon Bon, which is the big song off of that.
Look at you go.
I originally met with them before they recorded their first record about the possibility of co-producing and mixing and engineering the first record. But they were very upfront with me, and they were like, we just had a meeting with Chad Blake, and and he did Kiko by Los Lobos, which is our favorite record in the whole world. So we're just taking this meeting because the label wants us to meet with you, and we hit it off, And so when they did Irresistible Bliss, I think David Kahn and 2 other people worked on that record, and they called me up and like, we got this song, and 2 other people have mixed it, and it's not quite right yet. It's missing something. Could you give it take a stab at it? And I was like, sure. So I called up Soundtrack Studios in New York City, and I was like, well, if these 2 guys couldn't get it right, there must be something wrong with the track. So let me book a day and a half. So I'll do a full day of mixing, print it, and then come in the next day and tweak it if necessary. Because there's obviously 2 mixers couldn't get it right. There's probably a problem with the mix or with the track. And so I got there, and I just did what I normally do. I just kept on mixing and mixing and mixing and mixing. And then about 3 hours into it, I hit play, and I was like, there's nothing here I want to change, really. And the only note I got was from David Kahn, the producer. He said, make sure the bass is leading the track. I mean, the drums should be doing their thing, but the bass is the driving force. And so I did that, and I listened to it a couple of times. Then the band showed up I started at like 10. The band showed up at around like 1 or 2. And I was like, do you guys want to check this out? And they're like, are you done? I'm like, I don't know. You tell me if I'm done. And I played it for them. And they were like, play it again. And I played it again. I listened to like 4 times. They're like, man, you're done. Sounds great. And that was it.
That's
but
awesome.
The secret to that mix is that almost everything except the kick drum is going through the Eventide H910 in some way, shape, or form. And I have it set to a weird spreading algorithm, because everything kind of, if you listen to that mix, everything is swimming. It's just like, it's just like that. And that's what it is. So it's just like the H910.
And so you just decided to do that on the mix. It's
well,
like
no,
you had free
because
reign or what?
No, the H910 was my favorite, stereo emulator kind of thing, because it has 2 outputs. It's got a harmonized output with a delay, and then a straight up delay output. So the delay output would be set to like 7.5 milliseconds pan to the right. And then the harmonized output I would have set at 15 milliseconds and pan that to the left. And I used to always use that for vocals, just to make the vocals sound wider. And then sometimes I put the bass into it. So I was just sort of sitting there at the console. I was like, oh, that sounds good. Let me put the samples and the keyboards through that. Oh yeah, that sounds good too. I just kept on doing it. And I was like, that might be too much, but let me play for the band. And the band thought it was awesome. And that's it. That's one of my favorite mixes I've ever done. That's
a blast, man.
That's one of my signature mixes.
It's such a great mix. It's such a great track. All right, last one. Lemuria, Kick In.
Oh, God. Yeah. What about it?
Great trippy intro into like an upbeat pop song about moving to Punxsutawney. I think it was. I think those were some of the lyrics. Tell us about those guys and what that record was.
There's like there's a 3-piece. One of the guys lives here. The other two, I can't remember where they live. I want to say upstate New York, but I could be wrong. I have to.
It felt very East Coast in New York, you know.
I have to, and we did it here in Austin. But I have to make a confession here. I don't remember the song that you're referring to. Oh,
it's all right. It's all right. I just was taking notes on the one I was listening to, but it was just, it struck me as a very cool band. I love that.
Yeah, I mean, very pretty experimental. They allowed me to do whatever the hell I wanted, within limits, obviously. But that's the only thing I always ask of any band that I produce is like, at the very least, let me try my ideas. If you don't like them, I'm more than happy to like say, yeah, okay, great, shelve it. But just and that's the way I produce pretty much all the way around. Like it's like I'm always willing to try an idea,
Yeah.
Because you never know. Even ideas in the back of my mind, I'm like, that's not going to work. I know that's not going to work, and you never know because sometimes it surprises you because what you hear in your head and what comes through the speakers are almost always two wildly different things.
Awesome. Well, this is the closing one. Chris, it's hypothetical. We get to take the Wayback Studio machine, and you've answered it a couple times before, but I'll ask it again. You go back in time, find young Chris, and say, listen, dude, I've come back to give you this bit of advice. Here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the studio yourself today. I dig those Nikes, but the flannel's got to go. I don't know. What advice are you giving yourself if you go back in time?
The advice I would give myself is like in 1996, buy as many shares of Apple as you possibly can. But no, I just say keep doing what you're doing. I'd be afraid to fuck up the trajectory that I was already on. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like I know the mistakes that I made, but I know that. I wouldn't warn myself not to make them again because by making them, I became a better engineer, and a better producer and perhaps a better person as a result,
You'd even let that click track slide?
Oh, yeah, intro? Totally. I would totally let that slide.
Awesome, dude. Important. Well, thanks so much for hanging with us, dude. I really appreciate it, especially,
anytime. I love it. I love talking to you guys.
Ever so slightly under the weather. You came to life on that interview, so you might. Hopefully, you're exiting all healed and 100% now.
Yeah, man. I've done this flu for a week. It's killing me.
How can the Rockstars find you online? Find out more about you. What should they go check out to just sort of keep up with
check out. Yeah, you can go check out ChrisShawMix.com and then Chris Shaw Mix on Facebook and Chris Shaw Mix on Twitter and Chris Shaw Mix on Instagram. Those are
okay. Groovy.
Although I'm not on Twitter that much anymore for obvious reasons, but we won't talk about that.
Well, thank you for joining us, Rockstars. Thanks for watching. Please hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss more of these amazing opportunities to talk to folks like Chris here. And if you got questions, drop them into the comments, and I'll do my best to answer them. And if Chris doesn't see it, I'll send it your way and see if it's one you want to look at. But thanks so much, Chris. Great to hang with you, dude.
Great. See you later.
All right. Cheers.
Bye.
Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our awesome sponsors who help make this episode possible: iZotope, Native Instruments, Adam Audio, and SAE Institute Nashville. And remember to take advantage of our special coupon codes at iZotope.com, nativeinstruments.com. Use the coupon code ROCK10 10 for 10% off any plugin purchase. If you enjoyed Recording Studio Rockstars, please check out our sponsors using the links in the show notes. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They're going to help you make your best record ever. And please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel because it's a great way to help support this show. And leave us a comment below to let us know what you thought of this interview or who we should have on as a guest in the future. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars, Vlad Weselchenko and Liz Hulitskaya. Thanks so much for watching and listening, Rockstars, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.